Hey, Chris Liepe here for the Recording Revolution with 3 very common studio myths. These aren't just related to home studio owners or participators, but they occur, I think, more often in the home studio environment. And I thought it would be good to address these myths. They're not your typical ones, like, you don't need to spend a lot of money on recording equipment or whatever. Like, that, I think, has been debunked, largely because of this channel. These myths are not new, but they are less commonly thought of and more commonly overlooked and believed as true. So I'm excited to get into these with you and discuss the myth and the truth that we need to lean into. If you'd like more help with your own recordings, and you'd like to work on your chops, your tracking chops, mixing chops, getting sounds, all those sorts of things, click the link below and join my free recording course. It's the best place to start with me, and there's lots of ways that we can work together from there. Okay, myth number 1. Your room and or listening environment needs to be perfect or accurate. Man, I have quite the journey with this myth because I used to believe this and would spend all sorts of time like moving my desk to what I thought the right part of the room was, or messing with my acoustic treatment forever, or changing the room altogether. Like, oh, this isn't a good room. Let's go over here and do this room, or whatever. And even with my old studio, before I built this place, I would do things like, put couch cushions in different places when I was trying to get certain sounds. And I was unhappy with the way that my speakers sounded at my listening environment. And it didn't really seem to matter what I did, but I was unhappy with it. And then I built this place and got my speakers set up, and I was kind of like, oh, the dimension should be better. It's a little bit bigger, and this should be even better. And I sat down to start listening to things and mixing some things, and it was worse. I'm like, ah! So I started going through all the other things, like I moved the desk to different parts of the room and made my chair high and low and just all sorts of silly things. Not to say that those things aren't necessarily valid things to try and that you shouldn't do some of those things, but I became obsessed. And then I had a friend over who's mixed tons of albums, and he saw the new room. He said, oh, this looks great. And he was telling me that, you know what? No room is ever going to be perfect. And you see, I came from working in Russ Berger designed recording studios, perfect rooms. They were amazing sounding. And so to have to do my work in a home environment, I was always obsessed with the way my room sounded. I got to have the most accurate listening environment so I can make the best things happen. And he totally debunked that. And what he said is, shoot your room. And so I ended up getting one of these. It's a DBX drive rack, and they typically use these in live situations, but it allows you to put an omnidirectional microphone, like a reference microphone, in your listening position, and it will show you where the problems are in your room. And it was interesting because once I saw what it was, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because this room, even before I shot the room, I knew that right here, not up here and not down here and not 2 feet back that way, but right here, there's a huge bump at 122 hertz. There are a couple other problems I was hearing, but I started to notice it when I would be mixing drums and my kick drum would have this like boom, boom, boom sort of sound in there. And I'm like, ugh. So prior to shooting my room and having the DBX, I would do things like put an EQ on the master track while I was mixing with 122 dip, like minus 12 dB, and a couple other adjustments that I had heard as problems with my listening position. And then I would just bypass it for the bounce. But, I'd forget to bypass it. And so anyway, shooting the room and knowing where my problem areas were, allowed me to use a very mild corrective EQ. And I know that we have to be careful using corrective EQs at listening positions because it can cause phase shifts and some things that you don't want. So I didn't go crazy with it. I didn't take their recommendation as to doing it as flat as possible. I ended up notching out a few things to make it a little bit more balanced. And then I got used to it. I learned, so here's the truth. You don't have to have a perfect room. You don't have to have an ideal listening environment. You have to know where your problems are by numbers. And what happens when you walk to that side of the room or you walk to the back of the room? Oh yeah, if I walk in the back part of the room, I get this bump, and I'm standing up, I get this bump at like 70 hertz. And when I sit down here, that bump goes away and I get this 122 hertz thing. And you can notch things out a little bit with the DBX or equivalent. But the bottom line is, know your room, know your speakers, know your listening environment, so you know how to react when you're making your mixing decisions. And I've learned that it doesn't matter what room you're in and how perfect it is, you still have to have this sort of compensating mindset around it. It doesn't matter whether it's accurate or not, you still need to know it. Myth number 2, you will be able to fix it in the mix or in the edit. Oh man. This one, I think all of us know. Well, no, we don't know it. We've all heard it, and we all think we're not going to do it, but we end up doing it, right? Your singer's burnt out and they can't deliver, and you're like, okay, well, we'll just tune that, or we'll edit it and we'll, do a lot of stuff to it later. Or, your drummer has taken 18 takes and still isn't in the pocket or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, we'll just beat detective it. The thing is you can physically go in and edit the tar and edit the life out of performances. You can go in and notch things out and do all sorts of extreme things with the acoustic sounds that you create to do things to them, but you're not fixing anything. You might even think you're fixing things, but you're really not. If you are EQing to shape and enhance a great performance or a really cool recorded sound that just needs a little more of this and that, or maybe there's a couple problem frequencies, fine. But if you find yourself going over and over and over a sound, or going, editing so much, it's time to retrack. It's time to change the environment so that your performers are doing what they should be doing. It's time to ask them to practice more. I realize there's all sorts of obstacles here that I'm not addressing in terms of, skill level and all of those things. But there is so much bad music today made from subpar performances by producers and engineers that have all the tools, so they've lost the art of working with the artist to draw not a perfect performance, but an emotionally engaged, wonderful performance. Even if the sound isn't that great, the performance is good, right? So the truth is, plan on doing very little editing or very little fixing in the mix. If you can't make this your test, if you can't do a basic faders up mix and go, yeah, this is pretty good, I hear some things I want to change. If you can't do that after the raw track has come in, the raw performance, after you've done that and maybe done a little bit of comping, you need to retrack and rethink some things. Don't go down the rabbit trail of spending 3 hours auto-tuning something, or spending a whole afternoon beat detectiving a drum track, or trying to EQ or reamp guitars over and over again. Because especially with guitars, if the guitar player didn't perform with the amps that you're using, and you're trying to to create sounds that he wasn't reacting to in the studio, that's one reason there are so many sterile, horrible sounding guitar tracks out there, because the sound is disconnected from the performance, We don't want that kind of thing. So embrace this truth. All right, myth number 3. Great sounds make great recordings. This, again, is one of those things that I think I'll never fall for that. But it kind of feeds into myth number 2. I've got all the tune track samples and all the drum things that I'd ever need and all the guitar amps, and I've got great mics and I've got a good sounding room. Believe me, having worked in, multi-million dollar facilities with musicians that are seasoned and musicians that are not seasoned, even studio musicians out of Nashville. You can have fantastic musicians, people who do this for a living, and the vibe isn't there. They're phoning it in because they're just working, they're getting paid by the song for this album project or whatever, and they know how to play. They played on Grammy-winning albums or whatever, but the vibe isn't there, right? They're doing their thing, and the song maybe isn't the greatest. And here's the thing. Here's the truth. Great sounds, even great musicians, don't make great recordings. Great songs, great vibes, and emotionally connected, not perfect, performances make great recordings. So many examples of this. But, you listen to Nirvana's Nevermind and Something in the Way, right? Recorded wrong in every way, yet the performance, the vibe, the emotional connection, incredible. There's tons of examples. A lot of recordings that were made pre-reliance on digital recording, where the band would be all psyched up and playing all together, and the groove, the vibe is there. And a lot of this vibe is your job as the producer or engineer or maybe co-musician or co-writer. You need to put way more focus, or if you don't have the skill set to do so, find someone who can put way more focus on the quality of the song, the quality of the arrangement, how things are played, the way the sounds feed into the performance. It's not good enough to just have good sounds. You can have the whole stack of amps and amazing equipment, but if your artists aren't reacting and emotionally connecting with these sounds and performing and emoting based off of these sounds, you don't have it. That's why drum loops or triggered drums typically don't work that well, even though the sounds were recorded by George Massenburg and they're all amazing. Or why one guitar player can, play a little Bugera amp in the back of the studio, mic'd with a 57, and just rip it up and be amazing. And the next guy, because he hasn't figured out how to bend and stay in tune or put that vibrato in the right place, can use $2,000 worth of guitar modeling and it doesn't sound right. The truth is, the sounds, the gear, even the musicians don't matter that much. Emotional connectivity, vibe, performance, those are the things that matter. I hope I've given you some better perspective on some of these often thought of and at the same time overlooked studio myths. We'll see you for more.